The rain had been steady all afternoon, a gray curtain draped over Willow Lane. I was sipping lukewarm tea in the kitchen when the doorbell rang, shrill, insistent, and far too urgent for such a storm. My knees protested as I rose from the chair, but the sound carried an edge that made me quicken my pace. When I opened the door, my daughter Celine stood there, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her coat clinging like wet paper. Behind her were 4 children, their eyes wide, their clothes damp, their little shoes leaving puddles on the porch. "Just 1 hour," Mom Celine blurted. Her voice shook, but not from the cold. She shoved a diaper bag against my chest so hard it knocked the breath out of me. "I need you to watch them just 1 hour. Please." I blinked at her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Jonas, tall for 8, carried a sagging backpack that looked heavier than he was. Mira, 6, clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest, its ears darkened with rain. Beatrice, only 4, pulled at the hem of her too thin sweater, shivering. And Damien, my baby grandson, no more than 2, whimpered from his stroller. His cheeks flushed. 1 hour, I repeated, gripping the diaper bag. "Celine, what's going on?" But she was already backing away, her eyes darting to the street, as though chased by shadows I couldn't see. "I'll explain later," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "Just keep them safe. I'll be back soon." Her boots slapped against the soaked pavement as she ran to her car. The engine roared, headlights cutting through the rain, and then she was gone. No wave, no glance back. Just the echo of her tires fading into the storm. The children stood, frozen on the porch, water dripping from their hair. Jonas looked up at me with a face older than his years. "Grandma, where's Mom going?" I had no answer. My throat tightened, but I forced a steady breath and ushered them inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around us, but it did little to dry their shivers. I guided them toward the living room, pulling blankets from the old cedar chest. Mira clung to her rabbit, rocking it as though to calm herself. Beatrice asked for juice in a small, trembling voice. Damien's cries rose until I lifted him from the stroller and pressed him against my shoulder. His little body trembled, but he quieted with the rhythm of my rocking. The diaper bag sat heavy on the armchair where I'd dropped it. I unzipped it, hoping for food clothes, some explanation. A few diapers, a spare outfit, a couple of granola bars. Nothing more, except at the very bottom, a white envelope sealed tightly. My name scrawled across the front in Celine's hurried handwriting. I froze. My fingers traced the uneven letters. Mom. The paper was stiff, heavier than an ordinary note. I didn't open it. Something about the way it was tucked so deliberately unsettled me, as though Celine had left it there on purpose, a secret folded between diapers and crumbs. Jonas hovered nearby, watching me. I quickly slid the envelope back into the bag and snapped it shut. "Let's get you all warm first," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. "Then we'll see about dinner." I heated soup on the stove, the steam clouding my glasses, as the children huddled at the kitchen table. Jonas helped Mira peel off her damp socks. Beatrice yawned, her eyes heavy, while Damien banged a spoon against the tray of his high chair. They looked so small against the backdrop of my old house, 4 fragile lives left at my doorstep, without warning. As the storm raged outside, I ladled soup into bowls and set them before the children. They ate quickly, hungrily, as though they hadn't seen a meal all day. Watching them, my chest ached. I wanted to believe Celine would return after her hour was up, but every tick of the clock rang hollow. I tucked the envelope into the drawer of my writing desk, later that night, out of sight, but never far from mind. Its presence pulsed at me like a second heartbeat, a silent question I wasn't ready to face. The house was too quiet once the children drifted off to sleep, curled together on the guest bed beneath heavy quilts. I sat in the darkened living room, the rain still tapping against the windows, my hand resting on the drawer where the envelope lay hidden. My daughter's voice echoed in my ears. Just 1 hour, but the driveway outside remained empty. The rain didn't let up that night. It tapped against the windows like a reminder, steady and relentless, as if keeping watch with me. I pulled the curtain back more times than I could count, searching for headlights sweeping across the drive for the familiar silhouette of Selene stepping out of her car. Nothing came, only darkness and the steady wash of rain down the glass. My phone sat on the armrest, slippery from the number of times I had dialed her. Every call went straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice, bright and careless, told me to leave a message. I left 5, then 10. My words started sharp. Celine, call me right now, but softened to pleading. Honey, the children are worried. Please come back. The messages piled into silence. By midnight, Jonas was still awake, staring at the ceiling from the couch where I'd laid him. His sister Mira curled against him, clutching her rabbit, as if its button eyes could keep her safe. Beatrice had fallen asleep, sitting up, her cheek pressed into my arm. Damien lay across my lap, his breathing finally even. I stroked his damp hair, whispering to myself more than him. She'll be back. She has to be back. But the driveway outside stayed empty. When morning came, the storm passed, leaving a washed-out sky and a yard littered with twigs. I brewed coffee just to keep my hands busy, the scent filling the kitchen as the children stirred awake. Jonas sat at the table without a word. Mira asked for her mother. Beatrice rubbed her eyes and began to cry when I couldn't answer. I held them as best I could, my chest heavy with a helplessness I hadn't felt in years. I turned again to the diaper bag, hoping maybe I had overlooked something, an explanation, even a clue. At the bottom of a side pocket, beneath wipes and a half-empty bottle, I found a crumpled piece of notebook paper, written in Celine's scrawl. Thanks, Mom. I'll be back soon. That was all. No date, no reason, no apology. Just those words, as if leaving 4 children were no different from dropping off dry cleaning. My hands shook as I folded the note again. I wanted to tear it in half, but instead, I placed it inside the desk drawer with the sealed envelope from the night before. Both weighed on me like stones. The hours stretched. I made peanut butter sandwiches and sliced apples for the children, coaxing smiles where I could. Jonas insisted on helping spreading peanut butter clumsily across bread. Mira hummed to her rabbit, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. Beatrice colored on scrap paper with an old pen she found in my drawer. Damien toddled at my feet, reaching up with sticky fingers. Their small efforts steadied me more than the coffee ever could. Every time the floor creaked, every time a car drove past, my pulse quickened. But the moments passed and no one arrived. By evening, I set bowls of soup before them again, the same recipe I'd relied on the night before. They ate without complaint. Children adapt faster than we give them credit for, but their eyes betrayed them. Jonas looked toward the door as though sheer will might open it. Mira whispered, "Is Mom coming tonight?" Beatrice clung to my sleeve, silent but expectant. Damien, too young to ask, only called me Mama again, the word tumbling from his lips with a weight that made my throat close. I tucked them all into the guest bed, the 4 of them lined up together under quilts that had once belonged to my own children. I sat by the window after they drifted off my hands, clasped tight, my gaze fixed on the driveway that stretched dark and still. Celine had promised an hour. 24 hours had passed. The truth pressed hard against my chest. She wasn't coming back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. And yet the question gnawed at me sharper than the silence in the house. Why would my daughter vanish, and what desperation drove her to abandon her own children? The second morning without Celine began with 4 pairs of eyes looking to me for answers. Jonas sat stiffly at the table, his jaw set, like a boy trying to be a man. Mira fiddled with her rabbit, chewing its ear. Beatrice clung to my sleeve as if I might disappear if she let go. Damien squirmed in his high chair, his cheeks flushed from a restless night. I had no answers for where their mother was, but I knew hunger and fear when I saw them. Nursing had taught me to move, even when panic clawed at my chest. "Breakfast first," I said, forcing cheer into my tone. Everything feels better on a full stomach. I pulled out cereal, milk, and what fruit I had left. Jonas helped pour, careful not to spill. Mira giggled when Beatrice splashed milk onto her sleeve. Damien banged his spoon against the tray until I guided it to his mouth. Their small noises, slurps, crunches, chatter filled the silence that had sat heavy since Celine left. Afterward, I lined them up in the bathroom, showing Jonas how to help his sisters brush their teeth. Mira splashed water on her nose. Beatrice blew bubbles into the sink. I caught myself smiling despite the tightness in my chest. I had raised children before, but doing it again at 67 felt like stepping back into a marathon I hadn't trained for. By afternoon, the house was scattered with crayons, blankets, and tiny shoes. I made soup again, the familiar rhythm of chopping carrots and stirring broth grounding me. Jonas asked if he could help, and I let him peel potatoes. Mira hummed softly, perched on a stool. Beatrice carried spoons to the table like a proud waitress. Damien clung to my leg until I scooped him onto my hip, balancing him against me as I stirred. My arms ached, but I held him tighter. That night, I tucked them into the guest bed quilts, pulled up to their chins. Jonas whispered that he would keep watch until his mother came back. Mira kissed her rabbit and asked if I could sing. Beatrice pressed her hand into mine, refusing to let go until her breathing slowed. I kissed each of their foreheads, my chest swelling with a fierce, aching tenderness. Damien stirred as I tried to slip away. His little fingers reached for me, his lips forming a word in the dark. "Mama." The sound rooted me to the floor. I froze, heart thundering, the ache of it almost unbearable. I bent low, brushing his curls back from his forehead. His eyes were already half closed, the words slipping from his mouth as naturally as breath. He didn't know the weight of what he'd said, but I did. I stayed there until his breathing steadied, then slipped into the hall, pressing my back against the wall to steady myself. The title he'd given me wasn't mine, not really, but it was what he needed. What all of them needed, and I couldn't tell him no. In the stillness of that hallway, I realized this wasn't temporary. My daughter's absence stretched into something deeper than an hour, deeper than a night. The note she left was a hollow promise. The envelope with my name on it sat heavy in the desk drawer, a reminder of questions I didn't dare ask yet. For now, what mattered was 4 children asleep under my roof. They had no one else. Whether I was ready or not, I had become more than their grandmother. I was their nurse, their mother, their guardian, and as the house creaked around us, I braced myself for the battles still ahead, knowing the hardest part had only just begun. The Winslow house had stood on Willow Lane for nearly a century, its brick walls weathering storms and generations alike. My parents bought it after the war, raising me and my brother under its sloping roof. Later, Celine grew up here, her laughter once ringing through the same hallways that now echoed with her children's voices. From the outside, the place still looked proud, the red brick framed by white trim, an old oak tree stretching wide in the front yard. Its branches had held tire swings and secret forts, its roots sinking deep as if to anchor our family. The house carried memories in every creak of the floorboards, every scratch on the banister. It was the only constant in a life that had seen too much leaving. But with constancy came cost. The property had been appraised at nearly $380,000, a sum that looked impressive on paper, but felt like a noose around my neck. Taxes, insurance, repairs, it all added up faster than I could keep pace. The roof had leaked for years, patched more times than I wanted to admit. The furnace groaned every winter, and each groan sounded like a warning. I used to imagine selling the house once I fully retired. Downsizing, maybe moving into a smaller place where I wouldn't have to climb stairs with aching knees. But now, with 4 children sprawled across its rooms, the thought was impossible. This house wasn't just mine anymore. It was their shelter, their school, their anchor. The bills piled higher each week. Groceries for 1 had become groceries for 5, and that meant sacrifices. I cut cable-skipped doctor visits and stopped buying the small indulgences coffee from the corner cafe magazines at the market. I learned to stretch casseroles across 2 dinners to mend clothes instead of replacing them. My pension, meant for quiet years, vanished in half the time. Still, there were moments when the house felt alive again. Jonas and Mira chased each other down the hallway, their laughter echoing against the plaster. Beatrice drew chalk flowers on the back patio, leaving the stone bright with color. Damien toddled from room to room, his little hands brushing the walls like he needed to touch everything to make it his. Those moments reminded me why I couldn't let go, even when the numbers in my checkbook told me otherwise. The house was their fortress, the one piece of stability left after Celine's betrayal. Selling it would feel like betraying them, too. At night, though, when the children were asleep and the house had gone still, I sat at the kitchen table with stacks of bills and a calculator. The oak tree outside swayed in the dark, its branches scratching against the window, as though reminding me of its presence, its permanence. My hands trembled as I tried to make the math stretch far enough. Betty Coleman, my old friend, brought over casseroles and advice. "Don't you dare give up that house, Ellie," she told me one evening as we folded laundry together. "Those children need roots, and you need to know you're still standing on solid ground." Her words were steady, but the weight of reality pressed hard. I carried it quietly, tucking my worry away, like I had tucked that sealed envelope from Celine. Both sat heavy in their places, waiting for the day I'd be forced to face them. By day, the house felt like salvation walls, strong enough to hold our patched-together family. By night, it loomed like a ledger I could never balance, daring me to admit I was in over my head. And as the seasons turned, I wondered if this house would remain the safe haven I clung to, or if it would become the very weapon used against us. When Selena finally came back, the first week crawled by like a slow-moving storm each day, heavy with questions I couldn't answer. I woke to 4 small faces at my breakfast table, each expecting direction, reassurance, and normalcy. I gave them oatmeal and toast, combed their hair, wiped their hands, and tried to sound steady. But inside, I was unraveling. At night, after they had fallen asleep in the guest room, I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the house. The envelope in my desk drawer whispered to me in the dark. I wanted to tear it open to demand the truth written inside, but fear held me back. Whatever Celine had left there, it wasn't going to explain why she hadn't returned. By the 7th night, my exhaustion was a living thing pressing down on me. My hands ached from cooking, scrubbing, folding laundry. My knees throbbed from bending too often to pick up toys. My chest hurt most of all from the weight of pretending I wasn't afraid. That evening, I called Betty Coleman. She had been my closest friend since nursing school, and though she had seen me through births and funerals alike, I hesitated before dialing her number. When her voice came through warm and familiar, I nearly cried. "Betty?" I said, my voice breaking. "She's gone. Celine left them here, and she hasn't come back." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Left them. Ellie, what do you mean left them?" "An hour," she said. "Just an hour." I swallowed hard. "It's been a week. Nothing but a scribbled note and a diaper bag." "Oh, my Lord." Betty's voice softened. And the children? They're here. They're adjusting, I think. Jonas is quiet. Mira clings to her rabbit. Beatrice cries at night, and Damien. My throat tightened. He calls me Mama now. I waited for her judgment, but Betty only sighed. Ellie, you've always had a bigger heart than your arms could carry. But this isn't about Celine anymore. Those kids need someone who won't walk away. And that's you. Her words lingered long after we hung up. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone in my hands. My nurse's training told me I should call the authorities. Report Celine missing. Let social services step in. That would be the sensible choice, the lawful choice. But when I imagined strangers taking the children from my house, separating them into foster homes, stripping them of the little stability they had, left my chest constricted. No matter what law dictated, I knew they were safer with me. I walked to the guest room and stood in the doorway. Jonas had rolled onto his side, one arm draped protectively over Mira. Beatrice slept, curled like a kitten at their feet. Damien's thumb rested in his mouth, his breath soft and even. 4 children tangled together, like they were one body, one heart. In that moment, the decision settled into me like a stone dropped into still water. I wasn't sending them away. I would carry them no matter the weight, no matter the years. When I closed their door, I whispered into the dark hallway. They're mine now. The house groaned around me as though it understood what I had promised. I pressed my hand to the wall for balance, steadying myself against the truth of it. I was no longer a woman nearing her quiet retirement. I was a mother again, a guardian against storms, both the kind that battered windows and the kind that lived inside people. I returned to the kitchen, slid the sealed envelope deeper into the drawer, and let my hand linger there. One day I would face what it contained. But for now, there was no room for questions. Only decisions, and the one I had made in silence and in sorrow would shape every day that followed. The weeks that followed were a blur of lists and exhaustion. Every morning started with the scrape of cereal bowls, the shuffle of tiny feet across the kitchen floor, and the chorus of voices asking questions faster than I could answer them. Jonas wanted to know if I could help him with his spelling words before school. Mira tugged on my sleeve, begging me to braid her hair like the girls in the cartoons. Beatrice searched for a missing shoe, wailing as though the world might end without it. Damien clung to my leg, his thumb in his mouth, until I scooped him into one arm and tried to do everything else with the other. Groceries became my first battle. Feeding one had been manageable. Feeding 5 meant loading my cart with milk, bread, eggs, and whatever was cheapest in bulk. I learned which aisle hid the clearance stickers, which clerk was kind enough not to comment when I counted out coins. At the register, I held my breath until the total came up, praying it wouldn't topple the fragile balance of my checkbook. The bills stacked on my kitchen table in neat, accusing piles. Electricity, water, property tax. I shuffled them like a deck of cards, paying one and postponing another, hoping no shut-off notices would appear. Each envelope reminded me I was living on a pension never meant for this kind of burden. The doctor visits added their own weight. Damien caught a chest cold that left him wheezing at night, and I sat up by his crib, counting each shallow breath. Mira needed her school vaccinations updated. Beatrice had an ear infection that had her crying through the night, and Jonas required glasses when his teacher noticed he was squinting at the chalkboard. My nursing instincts helped me triage what I could, but every appointment meant co-pays, prescriptions, and hours at waiting rooms, where I pretended not to notice the stares. To cover it all, I took a part-time job at the local clinic. The director, an old colleague, looked me over with pity before signing the papers. "Ellie, you're not young anymore," she said gently. "Are you sure you can handle this?" "I don't have a choice," I replied. So I worked evenings filing charts, answering phones, sometimes standing in as a triage nurse when things grew hectic. My hands cramped from writing. My knees ached after hours on my feet. And every night I came home with the kind of bone-deep fatigue I remembered from my 20s, not my 60s. Arthritis burned in my joints like a warning I ignored. Still, the children began to thrive. Jonas's shoulders relaxed as he adjusted to school his teacher, sending home notes about his curiosity and determination. Mira sang to herself as she drew pictures of our house, her rabbit tucked under her arm. Beatrice bloomed with laughter when I praised her for setting the table without being asked. Damien's cough eased, and one morning he ran into the kitchen, arms outstretched, shouting "Mama," as though the word had been his all along. It was chaos, constant and consuming, but it was ours. The house echoed with voices, again filled with small footsteps, and the smell of spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove. At night, when I finally lowered myself into bed, every part of me ached, yet I clung to the sound of their laughter, as proof that love was enough to keep us together. But when I opened my eyes each morning to the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, I wondered how long love could stretch before it broke. The morning I walked Jonas and Mira into the elementary school, my heart felt heavier than the backpacks slung over their shoulders. The building loomed with its red brick walls and tall windows, the flag out front snapping in the autumn breeze. Children streamed through the doors, their chatter bright and careless, while I gripped Jonas's hand like he might vanish if I let go. Inside, the secretary slid a clipboard across the counter, her smile polite but curious. "Enrollment forms, Mrs. Winslow. We'll need their birth certificates, vaccination records, emergency contacts." I had gathered everything I could from Celine's bag, crumpled certificates, immunization cards, shoved between baby wipes. The secretary raised her eyebrows at the dates, but she nodded and stapled them without comment. The principal appeared a man with thinning hair and a voice too cheery for a Monday morning. He crouched down to Jonas's level. "So you're our new fourth grader, ready for your first day?" Jonas gave a tight nod. Mira pressed her rabbit against her chest and whispered, "Do I get art class?" "Of course," the principal said kindly, then turned to me. "And you're their grandmother?" I swallowed. "Yes. For now, I'm their guardian." His eyes flicked to the paperwork, then back to me. "And their mother." The question landed like a slap, though his tone was casual. Heat rose in my cheeks. I forced a smile that didn't feel real. "She's traveling for work," I said, the lie slipping from my mouth with practiced ease I didn't know I had. He nodded, satisfied enough, and ushered Jonas and Mira toward their classrooms. I watched them walk away, Jonas stiff and brave. Mira skipping lightly, her rabbit bobbing along in her arms. Pride tugged at me, but the shame of my lie pressed harder. At pickup that afternoon, a young teacher introduced herself. Her eyes warm but curious. "Mrs. Winslow, the children did well today. Jonas is bright, and Mira has quite an imagination." Then her voice lowered, almost hesitant. "Do you know when their mother will be back?" They mentioned her. I held my purse tighter. "Soon," I said softly. "She's just away on business." The words tasted bitter. I hated myself for saying them. But what else could I offer? The truth that Celine had abandoned them felt like a betrayal of its own, one I wasn't ready for them to overhear in whispers at school. Over the next weeks, the questions came in different forms. Other parents at the playground asked casually, "So where's Mom these days?" A nurse at the clinic, when I updated Jonas's vision records, tilted her head and asked, "Does his mother want a copy?" Even the mailman, noticing the sudden increase in children's magazines and school flyers, joked, "Did the grandkids move in permanently?" Each time I repeated the same story: "She's traveling. She's working. She'll be back soon." Each time I felt the words dig deeper into me like splinters. At night, Jonas asked in his quiet way, Grandma, is Mom really coming back? I smoothed his hair and told him she was just figuring things out. He nodded, but his eyes told me he didn't believe me. Mira drew cards with hearts and rainbows and asked me to send them to her mother. I slipped them into envelopes and mailed them to the last address I had, even though I knew they would come back marked undeliverable. The lies kept them safe for now, but they weighed on me heavier than the bills stacked on the counter. Each false word felt like a seed planted in soil I couldn't control. One day, those seeds would sprout, and I feared what might grow from them. Still, I smiled in front of the children and kept the story alive, praying it would buy me time until I found a way forward. And as I tucked them into bed, their trust shining in tired eyes, I couldn't stop wondering if the very lies I told to protect them would someday be the weapons Celine used against me. The seasons shifted, and with them came the quiet rituals of our new life together. Money was always scarce, but I learned how to make joy stretch farther than dollars ever could. Birthdays, for example, became simple affairs with balloons from the dollar store and cakes I baked from scratch. Jonas turned 9 with chocolate frosting smeared across his grin. Mira sang him a song she made up on the spot, and Beatrice clapped until her little hands went red. Damien toddled around the table, stealing bites when no one was looking. For a moment, the house felt whole, as though it had never known absence. Clothes came from the thrift store on Main Street. I took the children there one Saturday, handing each of them a small budget. Jonas chose a blue jacket that was a size too big, but made him look proud and grown. Mira twirled in a dress patterned with faded flowers, declaring it princess-worthy. Beatrice picked tiny jeans with sparkly patches on the knees, while Damien clutched a soft onesie with trucks on it, more fascinated with the tags than the fabric. Watching them parade their treasures through the aisles, I forgot for a while how thin my wallet had grown. Evenings became our anchor. After long days of school errands and work at the clinic, we gathered around the dinner table. Most nights I served spaghetti, stretching the sauce with extra tomatoes and garlic bread from day-old loaves. The children didn't care. They slurped noodles and laughed at each other's sauce-streaked faces, their giggles bouncing off the walls. Jonas pretended to twirl pasta like a chef. Mira tried to whistle through her fork. Beatrice invented a game where we rated slurping sounds, and Damien banged his spoon like a drum, delighted by the noise. One night, I leaned back in my chair, watching them glow in the warm light of the kitchen. The sound of their laughter filled spaces in me I thought had long since gone hollow. Pride swelled in my chest, fierce and tender all at once. I had not chosen this life, but it had chosen me, and in these small doses, it was enough to keep me going. Yet even in those moments of joy, Selene's shadow loomed. I found myself glancing toward the front door, whenever the children laughed too loudly, half expecting her to burst in and reclaim what she had abandoned. The sealed envelope in my desk drawer felt heavier with each passing day, like it held not just words, but the threat of her return. I wanted to believe she had simply lost her way, that she would walk back into our lives with an explanation and a plan. But the note she left had said only soon, and soon had stretched into months without a trace. At night, after I tucked the children into bed with stories, Jonas always asked for something about explorers. Mira preferred fairy tales. Beatrice wanted animals, and Damien fell asleep to the sound of any voice I sat alone in the living room. The house creaked in its usual way, but I heard it differently now, as if it was adjusting to our new rhythm, bearing witness to the fragile family we were weaving. I would sit with my cup of tea growing cold, thinking about the day behind us and the days still to come. Love had found a way into the cracks of our lives, steady and stubborn. But beneath the warmth, fear simmered, whispering that it could all be undone in an instant. And as I listened to the children's soft breathing upstairs, I wondered how long this fragile joy could hold before the past came knocking at our door. The first letter arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, the postmark smudged so badly I couldn't tell where it had come from. My hands shook as I opened it, half expecting an apology, some explanation, a promise that Celine was ready to reclaim the children she had left behind. Instead, it was only a sentence. "Mom, I need money. Send whatever you can to the address below." No greeting, no questions about Jonas or Mira, nothing about Beatrice or Damien. Just need scrawled in the hurried strokes of her handwriting, followed by a P.O. box number in Portland. I read it twice, then tucked it into the desk drawer with the sealed envelope she had left behind. I told myself it was only one letter, that maybe the next would hold more. But when the next came a month later, it was the same. And the one after that. "It's getting bad. I need cash. Send me $200. Quickly. Don't ask questions, just help me." Always short, always desperate. Sometimes the words looked jagged as though written in anger, other times faint as if she could barely bring herself to finish the page. Not once did she mention the children by name. I never sent money. I couldn't. Every cent I had went to feeding, clothing, and raising the 4 lives she had abandoned. Still, I kept the letters, each one folded carefully and slipped into the same envelope box. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, even though they cut deeper than any silence ever had. When Jonas asked if there was mail, I smiled and said, "Only bills." When Mira drew another picture and asked if we could send it to her mother, I nodded, mailing it to the same P.O. box that returned nothing but demands. The truth pressed against my lips every time, but I swallowed it down. How could I tell them their mother thought of dollars, not birthdays? That she remembered her own survival, but not theirs? Years blurred, and the letters slowed, but never stopped. Each time I opened one, my hope shrank a little smaller. Then one winter morning, I received a note that chilled me in a way the others hadn't. "You've still got the house on Willow Lane. Don't forget I'm entitled to half. We'll settle it one day." I read it 3 times, my pulse thudding in my ears. For the first time, Celine's words weren't about cash in the moment, but about something larger, something permanent. The house our family home wasn't just mine in her eyes. She was already planting seeds for a claim she would make years before she ever set foot back in Augusta. I folded the letter and slid it into the box with the others, my fingers trembling. I wanted to burn it to erase her greed before it poisoned the safety I was trying so hard to build. But a small voice inside me said, "Keep it. Someday you may need proof of what she really wanted." The children grew, and with them my resolve to keep the letters hidden. Jonas became protective, always watching for cracks in my smile. Mira continued to write her mother cards filled with rainbows and sunshine. Beatrice asked blunt questions I deflected with half-truths. Damien, too young to remember, much grew up calling me Mama without hesitation. None of them needed to see the words Celine sent sharp as knives, tucked between grocery lists and utility bills. At night, when the house was quiet, I would pull out the box and read them again, each demand echoing louder in the stillness. They weren't just letters, they were whispers of a storm still gathering hints of a reckoning I prayed would never come. But deep down, I knew better. Celine's absence was not the end of her hold on us. It was only the silence before her return. It was Jonas who first caught the whispers. One Saturday morning, I found him sitting on the porch steps, his shoulders tense. He didn't look up when I joined him. "Mrs. Callahan was talking to Mr. Rivers yesterday," he said flatly. "They said Mom ran off, that she left us with you." My throat tightened. "People talk, Jonas. They don't always know the whole story. But it's true, isn't it?" He turned his eyes older than his 15 years. "She didn't just go on a trip. She left." I reached for his hand, but he pulled back. folding his arms across his chest. I searched for words that would soothe without breaking him. Your mother. She had struggles, things you were too young to understand. But she loved you. She just couldn't stay. His jaw clenched. That's not an answer. He stood abruptly, retreating into the house, leaving me with the weight of the truth pressing harder than ever. Later that week, Mira slipped into the kitchen as I was peeling apples for a pie. She was 14 now, her eyes softer than Jonas's, but just as searching. Grandma. She began twirling a strand of hair around her finger. Do you think Mom will ever come back? I set the knife down carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. You always say that. She lifted her gaze. But do you believe it? I forced a smile I didn't feel. I believe we're together now, and that's what matters. She didn't argue, but the silence that followed carried her doubt more loudly than words. I told myself the children didn't need the full truth, that shielding them was an act of love. But the cracks were showing each question, widening them each whisper from outside, shaking the walls I'd built. Then came the day everything tilted. Damien was 12, lanky and restless, with a curiosity that made him wander ahead of me when I picked him up from school. That afternoon, I was late, caught in traffic after a shift at the clinic. By the time I reached the corner, I saw him standing near the playground fence. A woman in a dark coat leaned toward him, her hair falling loose around her face. Even from a distance, my heart lurched. Celine. I quickened my pace, but before I could reach them, her voice carried faintly through the autumn air. She lied to you, Damien. I'm your real mother. Damien's head tilted, confusion etched across his features. She touched his arm lightly, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of desperation and defiance. He didn't pull away, but his shoulders stiffened. By the time I reached the fence, Selene had slipped back into the crowd, vanishing with the same swiftness as the day she left. Damien stood frozen, his lunchbox dangling from his hand. Who was that? I asked, though I already knew. He looked at me, his eyes wide and unsettled. She said, "You lied. That she's my mom." The words pierced deeper than any letter she had sent. I bent down to meet his gaze, my hands trembling as I touched his shoulders. Damien, I've never lied about who your mother is. But she's the one who walked away. I'm the one who stayed. He blinked hard, his lips pressed tight, as though he didn't know which truth to hold on to. That night, he barely spoke at dinner. Jonas watched him closely. Mira hummed nervously, and Beatrice tried to fill the silence with chatter that went unanswered. The laughter that usually filled our kitchen felt miles away. When I tucked Damien into bed, he turned his face to the wall. I sat there in the dim light, wishing I could banish Celine's words from his ears. But poison once planted has a way of spreading. And as I sat in that room, listening to his uneven breathing, I feared the fault lines she had opened would only grow wider from here. 10 years passed, and the children grew into young adults before my eyes. Jonas had a steady seriousness that reminded me of my late husband. Mira filled the house with music, her voice growing stronger each season. Beatrice sketched on every scrap of paper she could find. Damien, once so small in a stroller, now towered over me, his laughter deep and startling. We built a life together. Fragile at first, but over time, it became as natural as breathing. Then came the knock. It was a sharp rap on the front door one autumn afternoon, loud enough to make the dishes rattle in their cupboard. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it, expecting a neighbor, perhaps Betty, bringing over one of her casseroles. Instead, Celine stood before me. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was smooth and styled, her coat expensive, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the polished woman, of means a stranger, wearing my daughter's face. Beside her stood a man in a tailored suit briefcase, in hand, his expression clipped and cold. Mother Celine said, her tone formal, distant. "This is Attorney Grayson." We're here regarding the children. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My eyes flicked past her to the driveway, where a sleek black car idled so different from the rusted sedan she had driven away in all those years ago. What about the children? My voice came out tight protective. The man opened his briefcase and pulled out a set of papers, extending them toward me. Mrs. Winslow, you are being served. Our client, Ms. Celine Winslow, is filing for custody of her 4 children. You are to appear in court within 30 days. The words blurred before my eyes. Custody, I managed. She left them here. I raised them. They're mine. Celine's eyes hardened. They are not yours. They are my children, and you have kept them from me unlawfully for a decade. That's kidnapping, Mother. The accusation struck like a blade. My knees wobbled, and I clutched the doorframe to steady myself. Kidnapping. The word echoed foreign and monstrous, something I could never have imagined tied to me. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Jonas, now 18, appeared at the end of the hallway, his textbooks still in his hands. His jaw tightened as he took in the scene. Mira followed her voice, catching. Mom. She whispered the word. Uncertain. Fragile. Celine looked past me to her children, her painted smile faltering for just a second before she straightened. Yes, sweetheart. I've come to take you home. Beatrice came halfway down the stairs, clutching her sketchpad. Damien stood at the landing, his broad shoulders tense, his eyes wide, with something between fear and fury. The air in the house thickened, the weight of 10 years collapsing into a single moment. No, Jonas said, firmly stepping closer. This is our home. Your grandmother has no legal claim to you, the lawyer interjected smoothly. The court will see that. Your mother is ready to provide a stable, lawful environment. Stable. Lawful. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the children's faces stopped me. Mira's hands trembled. Beatrice's eyes darted from me to Celine, and Damien gripped the banister so tightly, his knuckles whitened. The past I had shielded them from was no longer whispers. It stood at our door, dressed in silk and armed with the law. I forced myself to meet Celine's gaze. You left them, Celine. You gave them to me. Her lips curved into a thin smile. Prove it. She turned on her heel, the lawyer close behind, and walked back to the waiting car. The door closed with a finality that shook me to my core. The children gathered around me, their voices rising with fear and questions I couldn't answer. I held them close, my heart breaking with the knowledge that the fight I had long dreaded had finally arrived. And as I stared at the custody papers trembling in my hands, I wondered how I could defend us when the law saw Celine as their mother and me as nothing at all. The custody papers lay open on my kitchen table, their legal language sharp enough to cut. Every line seemed to twist the last 10 years into something unrecognizable. According to the petition, I had unlawfully withheld Celine's children, denied the biological mother access, and engaged in manipulative behavior designed to alienate the minors from their parent. Words like unlawful custody and parental rights leapt from the page, each one branding me with accusations I had never imagined hearing. The children sat clustered around me, their faces pale as I read sections aloud, my voice breaking, despite my best efforts to stay steady. She says you wouldn't let her see us. Jonas muttered, his jaw tight. That's a lie. Mira's voice trembled. Does this mean we have to go with her? Beatrice hugged her sketchpad to her chest, her eyes wide. Grandma, they can't take us away, can they? Damien didn't speak. He stood by the window staring at the driveway, as if Celine's car might reappear at any moment. His shoulders hunched, the memory of her whispered words still too fresh. I reached across the table, taking Mira's hand in mine. No one is taking you anywhere tonight. These are just papers. They don't decide anything. But the children had lived with me long enough to know when I was holding something back. Jonas pushed the documents toward me, his eyes blazing. "She's making it sound like you're the criminal, that you stole us." The words stung because I had read them the same way. My daughter had painted me as a thief, a manipulator, who had twisted the truth to keep her children for myself. I wanted to rage to tear the papers in half, but instead I forced myself to breathe. That's what her lawyer wrote Jonas. It doesn't make it true. Still, the questions poured out. Would the judge believe her? Would they be split apart? Would they lose the only home they remembered? The fear in their voices rattled something deep in me, but I held my ground. That night, after the younger three had gone to bed, Jonas lingered in the kitchen. His voice was quiet but steady. What if the court believes her? What if they don't listen to us? I looked at him. My grandson, almost a man, now his shoulders squared against a storm he shouldn't have had to face. "Then we fight harder," I said. "We tell the truth, all of it. We don't let her rewrite history." He nodded, though I could see the worry he tried to hide. Later, alone in my room, I spread the documents across the bed. Each accusation twisted my choices into weapons. The nights I had rocked Damien to sleep, the mornings I had braided Mira's hair, the afternoons I had waited at school for Jonas and Beatrice. All of it reduced to alienation and unlawful custody. Celine had been silent for 10 years, her only words, the letters I had tucked into the envelope box. Yet now she spoke through polished ink, her voice carried by an attorney's pen, and it sounded louder than mine ever could. I pressed my hands to my face, the weight of it crushing. Could truth compete with lies dressed in legal language? Could a decade of love outweigh a few sheets of paper stamped with a court seal? I didn't know. But I knew one thing: if she wanted a fight, she would have one. And as the house settled into silence, I felt the children's fear thrumming through the walls, binding us together for the battle still to come. The papers stayed on my table for days. Each time I tried to put them away, my eyes found the same phrases: custody rights, denial of access. They gnawed at me, but the more I read, the more something shifted in my gut. Celine's words weren't about love or regret. They were about possession. And the detail that caught me hardest was a line slipped almost casually into the filing's estate matters tied to the care of the minors. Estate. My chest tightened as I stared at the word. This wasn't about Jonas, Mira, Beatrice, or Damien. It was about the house. The same house Celine had mentioned in one of her letters years earlier, the one she had claimed she was entitled to half. The realization hit like ice in my veins. She wasn't here to mend broken ties or reclaim a decade of lost time. She was here for bricks, wood, and dollar signs. Custody was just the key she meant to use to unlock the door. That evening, I sat with Betty in her kitchen, a casserole cooling on the counter between us. She poured me tea and listened as I read parts of the petition aloud. "It's not about them," I said, my voice trembling. "She's after the house. If she wins custody, she can force a sale claim her half and leave me and them with nothing." Betty's face hardened. That girl always had an eye for shortcuts. But this is cruelty. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion pressing in. The worst part is the children don't see it yet. They're frightened she'll take them, but they don't realize they're just pawns. How do I tell them their mother doesn't want them? Just their inheritance. Betty reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You don't. Not now. You protect them, and you fight in court. You've got proof, Ellie. You've got those letters, the note from the day she left. That's more than most people get." I thought of the envelope box tucked away in my desk drawer, the stack of demands for cash, the scribbled threats about the house, the selfish words that never once asked about Jonas's asthma, Mira's drawings, Beatrice's nightmares, or Damien's coughs. Proof, yes, but also poison. proof that could crush the children's faith in their mother beyond repair. "I'll need a lawyer," I said finally. Betty nodded. "I know someone at the hospital. Her sister practices family law. I'll get you her number." For the first time since the knock on the door, a small spark of resolve lit inside me. If Celine wanted to turn the law against me, I would arm myself with the truth. I might be old, but I wasn't helpless. When I returned home that night, the children were scattered across the living room, their faces drawn. Jonas looked up from his textbooks. "Any news?" he asked. "Not yet," I said softly. "But we're going to fight this. Together." Mira leaned into my side, her voice a whisper. "Do you think she really wants us back?" I kissed her hair, the lie bitter on my tongue. She wouldn't have come if she didn't care. The words burned as they left me because in my heart, I knew better. Celine didn't want the weight of motherhood. She wanted the deed to Willow Lane. As I tucked them into bed later, I promised myself that I would find a way to show the court who she truly was, even if it meant tearing open old wounds. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and cold stone, the air thick with tension, as though the walls themselves held their breath. I sat at the front, my lawyer beside me, while Celine and her attorney occupied the other table, polished and composed. Behind me, the children waited, their faces pale but resolute. When the judge called them one by one, my heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole room could hear. Jonas was first. At 18, he walked to the witness chair with the same steady gait he had developed, carrying burdens far too heavy for his age. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and looked straight at the judge. "Aunt Eleonora raised us," he said firmly. "She worked nights, cooked meals, took us to school. Our mother didn't call, didn't visit, didn't send birthday cards. For 10 years she wasn't there. Aunt Eleonora is the only mother we've had." The lawyer tried to shake him, asking if perhaps I had turned him against his mother. Jonas didn't flinch. No one had to tell me anything. I lived it. Mira followed her 14-year-old frame, trembling as she sat down. She clutched her rabbit charm, the same one she had carried since she was 6. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke. "I used to make drawings for my mom," she whispered. "Grandma mailed them, but they always came back. I kept hoping she'd come for us, but she never did. Grandma told me she was just figuring things out, but I know she chose not to be here. I don't want to leave Grandma. She's my home." Her words cracked, and the room grew so quiet that even the judge leaned forward. Beatrice came next, her bluntness cutting through the hushed air. At 12, she had none of her sister's hesitation. "Mom left," she said simply. "Grandma stayed. That's all there is to it. Why should I go with someone who didn't want me before?" There was a ripple in the gallery, half shock, half admiration for her candor. Celine's lawyer frowned, but Beatrice folded her arms, daring him to argue with her truth. Finally, Damien. At the age of 13, he looked taller than I remembered in that moment, yet younger too. His face caught between boyhood and the shadows of betrayal. He shifted uneasily in the chair, glancing at Celine, then at me. She told me once that Grandma lied to us," he began, his voice low. The words twisted like knives in my chest. But when I thought about it, I realized Grandma's the one who's been here. She took care of us when no one else did. She didn't lie. She just didn't tell us how bad it really was. He paused, eyes glistening. "I'm not leaving her. Not for someone who only shows up when there's a fight." By the time he finished, the silence in the courtroom was heavy, almost reverent. I wiped my eyes with a trembling hand, overwhelmed by the strength in their voices. The judge tapped his pen thoughtfully against the desk. "Thank you, children. You may step down." They returned to their seats behind me, and I reached back to squeeze their hands. The tremor in my chest eased for the first time since the knock on my door. But as I turned forward again, I caught Celine's cold smile. She wasn't finished, not yet. The judge's voice carried through the courtroom, calm, but weighted. "Mrs. Winslow, do you have anything further to present?" I felt the box of letters pressing against me like a stone I had carried for a decade. My lawyer glanced at me, a silent question in her eyes. I reached into my bag, hands trembling, and drew out the sealed envelope that had sat in my desk since the day Selene left. "My daughter left this with me." I said, my voice low but clear, and more followed in the years after. None of them asked about the children. They only asked for money, or worse. The judge gestured for the bailiff. I placed the envelope in his hand, my heart pounding as it was carried to the bench. He slid it open, unfolding the papers, slowly reading each one with grave attention. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating as the judge began to read aloud. "Mom, I need cash. Don't ask questions. You've still got the house I'm entitled to. Half. We'll settle it one day. Send me 500, quickly. I'll be back soon." The words hung heavy in the room, their selfishness undeniable. Behind me, I felt Jonas stiffen. Mira's breath catch Beatrice's hand, tighten around her sketchpad. Damien, though, stayed still, his silence louder than anything. The judge set the papers down, his gaze steady on me. "Do the children know about these letters?" I swallowed hard. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I wanted to protect them from her indifference, from her greed." My voice cracked, but I held my ground. "I wanted them to believe their mother might come back for love, not for money." The judge leaned back, tapping his pen against the bench. For a fleeting moment, I thought the tide had turned. The courtroom murmured, heads nodding, the truth visible at last. But then Selene rose. Calm, composed, her attorney by her side. "Your Honor," her lawyer began smoothly, "my client has evidence that these so-called letters are a distraction from the real issue. We have here documents, emails, dated notices that show Mrs. Winslow denied her access to her children, ignoring repeated attempts to reconnect." He held up a folder, thick with pages each stamped and labeled. The bailiff carried it forward, and soon the judge was reading again. Messages that painted me as a barrier, a manipulator who had intercepted calls, blocked visits, twisted the children against their mother. My breath caught. They were forgeries. I knew it the moment I saw them. But the careful signatures, the official-looking stamps, the neat timeline, created a story that twisted my silence into guilt. Gasps rippled through the room. The weight that had begun to lift crashed back down on me. Selene's eyes met mine across the courtroom, cold and triumphant. For the first time, I saw not desperation, but calculation, a daughter who had honed her lies sharp enough to cut through the truth. The judge's face was unreadable as he set the folder aside. "This will require further review," he said evenly. "We must consider all evidence." My lawyer leaned close, whispering fiercely, "We'll fight this. Don't lose heart." But as I glanced back at the children, Jonas's clenched jaw, Mira's tears, Beatrice's confusion, Damien's troubled stare, I felt the ground shift beneath us. The truth was no longer enough, and I knew then that justice would need more than just words to survive. The trial had stretched into a second week, and the weight of it had nearly broken me. Selene's forged documents painted me as a thief. Her lawyer's voice rang smooth and confident, and though the children's testimonies had moved, Hart's doubt still lingered. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tight as the judge prepared to recess. Hope had begun to thin into something fragile, almost transparent. Then the courtroom doors opened. A tall man with graying hair walked in, a small USB drive clutched in his hand. His presence turned heads, and my heart skipped when I recognized him. Eric Lawson, Selene's ex-husband. He had aged lines etched deep into his face, but his eyes were steady as they swept the room. "Your Honor," my lawyer said quickly, rising to her feet, "we have a new witness with evidence critical to this case." The judge's brows furrowed, but he motioned for Eric to step forward. After he was sworn in, Eric cleared his throat. "Years ago, Celine sent me this," he said, holding up the USB, a video message. "I didn't think much of it then, but when I heard about this case, I knew it mattered." The bailiff carried it to the clerk, and within moments the screen flickered to life. Celine appeared younger but unmistakable, sitting in a dimly lit bar with a drink in hand. Her laugh was sharp, careless. "I'm done with the kids," she said, twirling the straw between her fingers. "4 of them. Too much. Mom can deal with them, she always cleans up after me. I've got my freedom now, and once I get money sorted, I'll never look back." She lifted her glass in a mock toast to starting over. The video cut to black, but the silence it left behind was louder than any words. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by a wave of murmurs. I felt my chest tighten, my hands gripping the edge of the table as Celine sat frozen, her face pale, her composure crumbling. The judge's gaze was stern as he looked at her. "Mrs. Winslow, do you deny this recording?" Celine's lips moved, but no sound came. Her lawyer tried to interject, stumbling over words about context and poor judgment, but the damage had been done. The judge struck his gavel, once the sound sharp as thunder. "Enough. The evidence is clear. Mrs. Eleanora Winslow has raised these children for 10 years with stability and care. Mrs. Celine Winslow's abandonment is undeniable. This court awards full guardianship to Mrs. Winslow and issues a restraining order barring Ms. Winslow from contact for a minimum of 7 years." The words washed over me like a tide breaking against stone. Relief surged, tangled with grief, so deep it nearly doubled me over. Behind me, Jonas exhaled hard. Mira let out a sob. Beatrice whispered, "We won," and Damien's hand slipped into mine, his grip tight, grounding me. Across the aisle, Celine sagged in her chair. Her mask shattered. For the first time, I saw not defiance, but emptiness. The gavel struck again, final and irrevocable. And as we stepped out of the courtroom into the autumn air, I wondered what kind of future we could build on the truth that had finally spoken. The days after the verdict felt lighter, though the scars of the fight remained. Word spread quickly through Augusta. Celine's schemes exposed her reputation shredded. Without the house, without custody, and burdened by her lawyer's fees, she slid into bankruptcy. I heard she'd moved into a cramped apartment, her so-called friends scattering once the money ran dry. I didn't gloat. I only felt the kind of sorrow that comes when someone you once loved chooses ruin over redemption. Here at Willow Lane, life began to steady again. The house, battered but unbroken, seemed to breathe with us, its walls no longer echoing with fear. Jonas packed his notebooks with the determination of a man stepping into his own. College acceptance letters lay neatly on his desk, waiting for his choice. He'd talk late into the evening about biology, about wanting to heal people the way I once did as a nurse. Mira filled the kitchen with song, her voice stronger every week. She joined the choir at school, practicing until the walls vibrated with her melodies. She had inherited Celine's beauty, but none of her mother's hollowness. Her gifts came from a place of hope, not escape. Beatrice sketched on every scrap she could find, leaving trails of pencil marks across napkins and notebooks. She dreamed aloud of studying art, her eyes shining with a light I prayed would never dim. Her sketches, raw and vibrant, filled the refrigerator door, turning it into a gallery of her heart. And Damien, once the boy who called me Mama, by mistake, now raced across fields with a soccer ball at his feet. His laughter carried through the yard, his confidence slowly stitching over the wound Celine had left with her poisonous whispers. He still looked at me sometimes with questions in his eyes, but his loyalty never wavered. One evening, when the children were scattered in their corners of the house, Jonas bent over a textbook, Mira humming as she washed dishes. "Beatrice, sketching Damien, practicing kicks in the yard. I opened the drawer of my desk. Inside lay a small brass key polished by time. It was the spare to the front door, once hung on a hook for family. I held it in my hand, the weight of it, pulling at memories too heavy to name. I slipped it into a small wooden box and turned the lock. As the key clicked shut, I whispered to the silence. Not for intrusion, only for respect. The house creaked in reply, the oak outside rustling as if it too understood. We had survived betrayal lies and courtrooms. We had stood together when everything threatened to pull us apart. The future stretched uncertain, but wide before us, paved, not with Celine's greed, but with the quiet strength of what we had built. And as I looked at my family, my children now in all but name, I knew the door to my life was no longer open to those who came empty-handed. When respect finally knocks, will I open the door or guard it forever?